And I'm sure it's Katie's fault. I don't know. The system's crashed, so there's no audio, there's no video, there's no live stream. So a couple of things come to mind. You can say whatever you want, there's no evidence. Or the other thing is we have to use our outdoor voices today, and I appreciate everybody working towards that. We're going to record it the old-fashioned way, and it'll be available, but we're going to start. So the first thing I'd like to do is call the meeting to order and welcome you all here for our Flashback Thursday, where we're doing no technology. And pleased to see each of you here. This is our last meeting of 2019, moving rapidly into 2020, and lots of things on the agenda for the BSCC. But the first thing I'd like to announce today is the resignation of one of our board members, Francine Tornow. She was on the board, enjoyed a great tenure here, but she took another job. I believe she's in Martinez, California, working for PG&E.
It's Chevron.
Chevron. I knew it was somebody that, well, okay, Chevron's less catastrophic for this month than PG&E. But she's working for Chevron, and you know, she's not going to have the kind of time she needs to commit to the board, so sad to see her go. She sent me a very touching note, and I won't read it, but I will synthesize it a bit to say it was emotional for her to depart. She's going to miss us all. She felt like her life experience grew greatly through participation in the board, and she promises to come back and bug us whenever we need that done. Moving then, I would ask Adam to call roll, even though I've given away a few surprises already. So go ahead, Adam.
Chair Penner.
Here.
Mr. Diaz.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Mr. Groudon.
Here.
Mr. Gore is absent today. Mr. Seal.
Here.
Mr. Urtola. Here. Mr. Baronco.
Here.
Mr. Mills and Mr. Budnick are absent as well. And Mr. Steinhardt. Here. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Nice.
The microphones are working now.
All right. I will urge you now not to use your outside voices.
So, Madam Chair, can we go back to Francine's resignation? I mean, that takes me by surprise. I just want to say, I just think she's been an absolutely terrific board member. She carries such a positive attitude, always smiling. It isn't always happy up here.
Right.
And range of knowledge, volunteered for everything that was offered. And I'm really going to miss her. I'm sad to see her go.
Oh, I wish it was live stream. I bet she might catch that. But, you know, I think we'll probably send her a note about everybody and try to do something official. But I appreciate your remarks. Anybody else? All right. We have a quorum. We have council in the house. I'm always told to remind you that Aaron McGuire is here. I'm not certain why that is, but
Tradition.
Tradition is he's here. He's at the table. I'm going to skip myself and the chair report and move right to the executive director report, and take it away, Katie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the board. I'm Katie Howard, the executive director here at the DSCC. I want to start just with a very brief update on the ongoing extensive work that our various executive steering committees are engaging in various stages of grant development. Chair Penner is chairing the Prop 64 executive steering committee. They met earlier in the week and are making terrific progress on RFP development. The CalVIP ESC, chaired by Chief Mills, has already had an initial 2-day meeting and another one coming up. And then there are materials on the agenda, action items today, thanks to the hard work of both David Steinhardt and Chief Urtola. So thank you all to the many board members who are doing a lot of extra ESC work. We very much appreciate it. Speaking of ongoing ESC work, our Adult Regulations Revision Executive Steering Committee is about to launch. You approved the appointment of that committee, and we will be having the first meeting on Monday, December 2nd, here in our offices in Sacramento. Part of the agenda for that December 2nd meeting will be the identification of working group subject matter areas. So I really just want to encourage members of the public, members who might be listening to the recorded meeting at some point in the future, to be aware, and we will put this out in our follow-on press release from today's meeting. We really want to be sure that people are aware that we are taking input and suggestions for possible areas of review and revision on the adult regulations. It'll be best if we have input to consider in time for that first meeting by November 25th. So we're going to do a reminder and a initial deadline. It's not a hard deadline. All of this work is done on a flow basis. The meetings are open. Very helpful to have input into topics that might need some review. There is a button on our homepage under 2019 Adult Rights Revision, and like I said, we'll include it in our press release after this meeting to try to encourage additional comments that may not have yet come in. In addition, I also wanted to mention that the Community Corrections Partnership Survey for this year was released on November 10th. And as board members are probably aware, that's an annual survey that's used to collect information to inform and educate California lawmakers, local governments, the public, the media, and anyone who's interested in the ongoing work that counties are doing through their implementation of public safety realignment and their ongoing work as CCPs. So we will prepare that report. Surveys are due December 13th, and then we take a few months to compile all that information, and we will bring it to you. So that concludes my report. Oh, excuse me, one other item. For our 2020 board meeting schedule, we had asked you to hold Thursday, January 23rd for a possible teleconference meeting, and Linda and I would like to release that date at this point. The issue that we thought would be needed to be considered on an urgent basis no longer looks that way, so our first meeting in 2020 is going to be on February 13th, so you can cancel that January 23rd date. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions for Katie? Okay, moving on then. I'm delighted that today we're going to hear a 2-year preliminary report on Prop 47. I think this board did a great deal of work on 47, watched it from our public hearings to the published RFP to the grants. And believe it or not, we're so far down the road now, we're going to take a hard look at how we did. We've been on Prop 47 so long. Ricardo got married, is going to have a baby. And I think that is, just goes to show you how he's got tenacity and stays with the job. And so Ricardo, our newly promoted deputy director, welcome to the podium. We expect a fabulous performance now that you're a big deal.
I'll take it. Okay, again, good morning, everyone. My name is Ricardo Goodrich from the Corrections Planning and Grants Programs Division. And today we are very excited to share some preliminary findings from the first 2 years of the Proposition 47 grant. And you may recall that our efforts date back to 2015, late 2015, early 2016, when we hosted a series of public listening sessions from Oakland all the way down to San Diego. And in 2017, the board approved an allocation of $103 million to 23 public agencies for mental health services, substance use disorder, and diversion programs for people in the justice system. In a few minutes, my colleague Stacy Wright will guide you through our initial findings. The quick spoiler alert, the grant has served a large number of clients, and sites are reporting several positive outcomes. At the end of staff's presentation, we will have another presentation from one of our grantees. We've invited the San Francisco Department of Public Health out today and asked them to provide a brief overview of their program as well as their initial findings. The one little hiccup I do foresee, though, is we had a short video planned. Well, okay, well then forget what I just said. Before Stacy begins her presentation, we have a 3-minute video from a client that is benefiting from Proposition 47 services. This particular client is working with our Los Angeles Diversion Outreach and Opportunities for Recovery program. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy our presentation.
would like to move so you can better see the screen, we apologize for the technical difficulty.
Alex Basley Sr., and I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. God had blessed me. I went to college, I left college. I was able to buy a home at the age of 19, and God blessed me abundantly. My life, unbeknownst to myself, started going downhill. I started trying and using a bunch of different drugs. I was able to stop this drug, stop that drug, and then I came upon cocaine. And wow, cocaine hung on to me for about 40 years. Being homeless is like being on Mars or something, or being on the moon. It's like you can be here with all these people around you and just be like invisible. I became a robber, I became a murderer, I became a very unpleasant person. And robbing and possessions afforded me going to prison. I got out and I went back to prison again, and I think the third time is when I started really evaluating what was going on. It's been great that I have been afforded a situation where I can like really get myself together. Thanks to LA Doors, they afforded me a place to live, right? Where I wouldn't be homeless, where I could go have a roof over my head, I have meals. Like I said, God has been working tremendously in my life as well, because He put it on my heart and my mind to do certain things that I wanted to do. And LA Door has afforded me a comfortable place to live and surrounding to be able to do that. I actually hadn't worked since like 1985, and here it is 2000 something, but a job became available at West Angeles, and I put an application in for the job at West Angeles. Preparing food is a very spiritual process, right? If you want some good food. I can personally say that I've eaten food prepared by a person that's not connected to God or had nothing feelings, man, and that's what the food tastes like. Where I'm at West Angeles, man, the meals are prepared with love and understanding, you know what I mean? And the meals come out great. That's how I see the meals coming out great. It's the love. It's the love that I share and get from the people at West Angeles that work in the kitchen as well as the converts that I can take with me wherever I go.
Seeing you when you came, it sure is a blessing to see where you are now. Yeah, I always say we may not even want to be. Thank God we're not really.
It feels great. It feels like I'm a part of the human race again. Right? But for a long time, I continued to get high because I just didn't fit in or feel like I could fit in anymore.
You feel like that on Mars and the moon?
Not at all. Not at all. Because it ain't nothing going on Mars and the moon. There's a whole lot going right here in this country, in my neighborhood. And I hope and pray to God that I'm able to get in a better position to continue living in my neighborhood. My name is Ronald Alex Basley Sr., and I grew up in South Central Los Angeles.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Stacy Riley. I'm a research data specialist in the research unit here at the BSCC. And today I'm here to share with you some of the preliminary findings from the Prop 47 grant. I'm also going to introduce you to our new Prop 47 dashboard that we will be updating regularly with new data as it comes in. So a little bit of background. Prop 47, also known as the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, reduces some low-level, non-violent property and drug crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. And the state savings generated from this act is invested into the prevention and support programs in K-12 schools, victim services, and mental health and drug treatment. Specifically, those funds are distributed among 3 state agencies. The BSCC receives 65% of those funds for mental health and substance use disorder services. The California Department of Education receives 25% for truancy and dropout prevention. And the Victims' Compensation and Government Claims Board receives 15% for trauma recovery and services for victims. Now, Assembly Bill 1056 provided additional direction to the BSCC. Specifically, they said that the services and programs must be designed to serve people who have been arrested, charged with, or convicted of a criminal offense, and have a history of mental health issues or substance use disorder. It also included additional priorities to the Prop 47 grant, including housing-related assistance and community-based supportive services such as job skills training, case management, and civil legal services. AB 1056 also clarified that both adults and juveniles are eligible to receive these services. As Ricardo mentioned, in November 2016, we released an RFP and received 58 proposals, requesting approximately $225 million. Of those, 23 proposals were funded for approximately $103 million, and that was based on the first 3 years of savings. In September 2018, the board approved a 1-year no-cost extension, and 19 of the 23 grantees accepted that extension. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide you with preliminary findings on the Prop 47 grantees' progress, as well as introduce you to our Prop 47 dashboard. So the next 2 slides give you a little bit of an overview on the grant funding. The first column lists the grantees, and you will notice next to Oceanside Unified School District there is an asterisk. And that is there because Oceanside has, as of August 2019, rescinded the remainder of their grant funds. The second column is the amount of funds that were awarded, how much of those funds have been spent by each grantee during the first 2 years. And the final column is, of those funds that have been spent, the amount that has been passed through to CBOs. During the first 2 years, 76% of the funds that were spent were passed through to CBOs. So I'm going to summarize for you the who, the what, the when, and the where for the first 2 years of Prop 47 grants. I'm excited to say that we served 11,349 unduplicated participants in the first 2 years with Prop 47 funding. And so the video just shows one of several thousand unique stories to these individuals and the effects that these funds are having. Approximately 70% of the participants are male, and 44% of the participants range between the ages of 26 and 43, followed by another 28% between the ages of 44 to 64. Looking at the racial and ethnic breakdown, approximately 33% of our participants are Hispanic, 28% are white, and 27% are Black. So that's the who, the what are we providing? Well, we're providing a lot of different services. Ricardo mentioned that grantees were required to provide mental health services, substance use disorder treatment, conversion program, or some combination thereof. As this chart shows, 83% of our grantees are providing mental health services, 89% are providing substance use disorder services, and 39% are providing diversion programming. The next 2 slides give you an idea of the wide range of additional supportive services that our grantees are providing. The most common support services provided include job skills training, case management, and transportation. As you can see, over 80% of our grantees are providing those. The other category, this is generally made up of services that only 1 or 2 grantees are providing. This includes things such as family support services, family advocacy, jail in-reach, and social skills training. So looking at the win, each quarter grantees report to the DSCC the number of individuals that received a particular service during that quarter. And so I'm going to go through the different services and looking at the numbers broken down by quarter. Note that these are not unduplicated counts. So if an individual receives a service for more than 1 quarter, they are counted each of those quarters. And if they receive more than 1 service within a quarter, they are counted for each service. So keep that in mind as you're looking at these data. So the first required service is diversion services, and as you can see, the number of individuals served has been fairly consistent over the first 8 quarters. Mental health was a little bit slower to start up, increasing dramatically during year 2. The same pattern for substance use disorder treatment. And we had several grantees who reported substance use disorder treatment and mental health services as a combination services and not distinct services. And so that is in the lightest blue shaded area there. Another way to look at these same data is by the total number of required services provided in a quarter, which is the number at the top of each bar, and the breakdown of the proportion of those services. Looking at other support services, again, AB 1056 added additional priorities for the Prop 47 grant, including housing-related assistance, community-based supportive services such as case management, legal, and employment services. So looking at these, the most common supportive service provided was case management. We'll note that this is heavily influenced by LA County. So for example, in quarters 7 and 8, approximately 2,000 of those services provided in each quarter is by LA County alone. And then we have employment, housing, legal services, and then other supportive services. And those other services are everything that I listed earlier, including things such as transportation, public benefits enrollment, education services. So this is a very, and again, you can look at this data, looking at the total number of services per quarter, which is the top of each bar, and broken down by the proportion of each service. So this is very high-level information, talking about the statewide. If you're interested in finding out what each grantee is doing, we have a new dashboard that is on our website, and it allows you to explore the data at the grantee level. It includes a description of the Prop 47 program for each grantee, the number and demographics of the participants each grantee is serving, as well as the services, the types of services and numbers of services that each grantee has provided. Now, I'm not going to go to the dashboard right now in the interest of time, but I'm happy to do so at the end of the presentation if somebody would like to see that. I do want to also note on there is a tab for recidivism rates. It's not included currently on the dashboard, and I'm not talking about it today. And the reason for that is that insufficient time has passed to evaluate recidivism data. So as you saw with the services being provided, most of the individuals receiving services were receiving those services in year 2. And so most of the participants have been out of the program for less than a year. So any recidivism data would not be an accurate reflection of the actual effectiveness of the program. This recidivism data will be added to the dashboard at the end of the grant period. Now we know implementing a grant is not an easy task, and we sent out a survey to our grantees in September of 2019 and asked them to describe 3 challenges that they had encountered during the first 2 years. This was an open-ended question, so they could freely respond, but there was a lot of similar themes that emerged, which are presented up there on the screen. One of the most common challenges was the delays in startup, especially with hiring qualified staff. Another common challenge was having to make refinements to their referral process. Either they weren't getting enough referrals, or the referrals they were receiving were for individuals that did not qualify for their program. In that survey, we also asked them to report accomplishments. Again, this was a free response. Many of the successes that were related, that they reported, were related to serving the participants that are reflected in the data that I've already presented. But I wanted to point out one accomplishment that I think really shows a picture of the influence that this proposition and this funding has had, and that's with Orange County Healthcare Agency, who is one of the Prop 47 recipients. They work closely with local law enforcement and contracted with a local CDO called Project Kinship to run their re-entry center and have peer navigators. The presence of the Prop 47 program increased awareness of the existing gaps in the services within the county. And these gaps resulted in several policy changes within the county. In April 2019, the Sheriff's Department implemented a new policy to cease nighttime releases. So individuals being released from jail are now released primarily between 7 and 10 in the morning. The discussions about coordinating releases from jail for these Prop 47 participants has sparked broader discussions about coordinating reentry and warm handoffs for those individuals. And the county is now developing a reentry team, which will be stationed inside the jail to review discharge plans with all individuals being released, not just the Prop 47 participants. And they'll perform warm handoffs for any individuals needing services at the time of release. And as a result of the success of the re-entry center that Project Kinship is running, County CEO and Board of Supervisors has begun creating a comprehensive re-entry system. And they're using the Prop 47 re-entry center as a model program for establishing additional re-entry centers throughout the county. And this was a quote that I pulled from their 2-year preliminary evaluation report that I think sums it up nicely. Having this Prop 47 grant has sparked conversations across county partner agencies about coordinating and integrating services that individual agencies have been wanting to have for quite some time. At least partially because of this grant, the system of services for justice-involved individuals is changing and improving quickly in Orange County. So the Prop 47 programs across the state are not only benefiting the Prop 47 participants, but also are resulting in system changes that are benefiting more than just the participants. So these data show that there's a lot of good work being done by our Prop 47 Cohort 1 grantees in serving justice-involved individuals with mental health issues and substance use disorder. If you're interested in finding more about what each specific grantee is doing, I encourage you to go to our dashboard and explore that. Also, each grantee's 2-year preliminary evaluation report are posted on our website, and I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions, anybody? All right.
Just one really briefly. So I was looking at the text of Prop 47 while you were making the presentation, and I didn't see outcome measures in the text of the ballot initiative. Are those all grant-based, data collection and so on, and the recidivism data that's coming later?
Excellent question. The only required outcome measure for Prop 47 is recidivism, using the state BSCC's definition. And most of the grantees did report it in their 2-year preliminary reports. But again, it's a very small number of participants and very short period of time.
What's the definition of, or the definition measures for recidivism that's being used for this?
Okay, Ricardo, can I don't know, 3, conviction within 3 years of a release, it's conviction, it is conviction, and it's 3 years from release or prison or supervised. Is that it?
I believe it's 3 years clear of custody or 3 years starting when we start supervision.
Here,
I think.
we'll give it to you.
There you go.
We got it. It's a conviction of a new felony or misdemeanor committed within 3 years of release from custody or committed within 3 years of placement on supervision for a previous criminal conviction. Thank you. And then within that definition, the other footnote to add is along with there being the state required definition, projects are allowed to also report on a supplemental recidivism definition if they have one locally as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.
I have one comment to your very small font for an older person. Slide 9, I think, with the age of the Prop 47 participants.
Yes.
I mean, by large measures, it seems like we're hitting the intent of the voters, and the results you set forth are pleasing, and I think we're all gratified to see that. This was the only flag for me. When I look at the age, it seems like the population that is served skews a little bit older than our typical criminal justice population. I'm saying that from the seat of my pants, but I know what my population is on probation, and I have a pretty good recollection of statewide numbers as well. You know, with so much attention, we're talking every time, I'm sure, about transition age youth, because I think rightfully so, it's a big part of what we're focused on, and it was always a focus of mine when I worked for the state, because that group leapt out as the highest risk, highest recidivating group. You know, people who are, you know, young, mostly men in their early 20s, let's say. I think we all know from just our common experience that that tends to be the riskiest population. So I just want to flag this for the group, and it may not be something for us now, it may not be for Prop 47, but it may be in the future that we want to, you know, think about ways to incentivize serving a population that is most at risk. Particularly now for Prop 47, you know, it was very specific that it aimed not just at adults, but also juveniles, and it also has this diversionary aspect as well, which would make me think that our goal would be to serve people, if anything, a little bit sooner than rather than at the back end of the criminal justice process. So maybe there's an explanation for that, and you know, it's not a bad thing to serve older clients as well. From a taxpayer perspective, I know that some of our oldest clients are very high cost clients. They're users of multiple behavioral health systems, criminal justice systems, treatment systems. So it's not a flaw or a failing, but just something for us to think about as we you know, shape future grants and incentives for people to serve different types of populations.
Perfect, and if I could, Chief, a few things on that nature. So through the competitive process, as you may recall, each site was certainly allowed to identify their target population. And in large part, I think most of the projects, of the 23 projects, I'm going to say 20 of them decided to focus on the adult population. And then within that, that pot, it was even further refined as folks were thinking about who would receive mental health services and substance use disorder treatment. So from what we can gather, I think some of it just occurred naturally. There were some sites, I want to say that there's 3 sites that focused on the juvenile population, but again, the large numbers certainly do trend the other direction, as you correctly know. And then I think we should also kind of acknowledge one of the things that, that Stacy raised, which is a significant portion of clients being served is coming from the LA region, and that has a significant impact on how those numbers kind of trend up age-wise as well. So again, it doesn't detract from, I think, your larger overall point about who we're serving, but just to kind of acknowledge that that's the information that we've been provided.
That's helpful. Any other questions from board members? Okay, moving on, I think there's one more presenter, correct?
Yes, there is. At this point, I would like to introduce Angelica Almeida and Christy Glass, who are with the San Francisco Department of Public Health, and talk about their Prop 47 program.
And do you have a PowerPoint?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I was gonna let you turn on the lights and we can actually see what you look like.
You don't need to, I'm a young child, it's not good.
At my age, this kind of lighting is really pleasing.
Exactly. We all look awake and youthful, it's great. So good morning. Again, I'm Dr. Angelica Almeida. I'm the Director of Forensic and Justice Involved Behavioral Health Services for the San Francisco Department of Public Health. So I have a really long title because I do a lot of different things. And I'm joined by Christy Glass, who is part of our evaluation team with Hatchell Tabernick and Associates. And so we very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to have multiple grants through BSCC. And particularly to provide services through Prop 47. And I have to say, we were awarded Cohort 2 as well, and so you're stuck with us for a little bit longer. So I'm here today to talk about, of course, Cohort 1, which is our Promoting Recovery and Services for the Prevention of Recidivism. Next slide, please. Oh, does the clicker work? Okay.
You got it.
Oh, perfect, sorry.
No, you're good.
Not everything's broken.
I work for the Department of Public Health. I can work with this. It's fine. Okay, so what is Prosper? So part of our goal around this was to be able to expand services, and particularly one of the benefits, and is unique and unusual, is to have dedicated treatment capacity for individuals who have had a criminal justice background and have had contact with the criminal justice system. So our goal, of course, is to work with individuals, as we've discussed already this morning, who have behavioral health needs and have had that contact, with a primary focus of working with individuals who are exiting the jail or criminal justice system. Our goal is to reduce recidivism of participants and to improve their health and housing status. So these are services that are funded under the grant. The bulk of our grant funds are going to expanding our treatment capacity within substance use disorder treatment, and we contracted with a new contractor for us as a city, Salvation Army, and it's funding 32 residential treatment beds for a 3 to 6 month stay and 5 social detox beds of that program. It also, we were just talking about transitional age use, so I'll pause and talk about that a little bit more, but we're working with one of our CBOs, is Felton Institute. They have a lot of experience working with transitional age youth, including a dedicated case management team. They also are treatment providers for one of our problem-solving courts, our young adult court. And so we contracted with them to have a clinician who was dedicated to linking with transitional age youth into substance use disorder services. And then to provide that case management for them and to work with Salvation Army to develop a case-specific curriculum at that program. One of the things we heard a lot in preparing for this grant was that we have a lot of services in San Francisco, and that there's a big challenge in individuals transitioning from our child, youth, and family services into our adult system of care. And we've done a lot to support that TAPE population, including having linkage experts and being really flexible to meet the needs of that population. We had that primarily on the mental health side and wanted to mirror that on the SUD side through this grant opportunity. The other thing we heard, particularly around substance use disorder treatment, is that it really wasn't developmentally appropriate and it wasn't meeting the needs of TAPE youth. And so that's part of why we built that in terms of developing that curriculum, which is in process. I have to say one of our biggest challenges was getting staff on board. We had a staff member for this position who then transitioned to another role. And so it took a long time for Felton to be able to find that perfect unicorn of an individual who has experience and expertise with substance use disorders, as well as expertise with transitional age youth. We fortunately have found that person, and so while it's not reflected in this presentation, we have seen an increase in the number of TA youth who are being served through this grant. The other thing I would also note is that about 10% of our participants have been transitional age youth in our residential treatment program. And while we would like it to be higher, we do find that transitional age youth largely require a lot of intensive low threshold engagement prior to participating in treatment. And it's not really surprising. I think what we naturally see is that individuals have less contact with the criminal justice system as they age and are more open to engaging in these intensive services. But that will continue to be one of our primary target populations for outreaching with this grant. The other thing we built into this grant is to have peer support for participants through RAMS, which is another CBO. So for 60 days after completion from the program and leading up to completion of residential treatment at Salvation Army, individuals would be able to work with a peer counselor. Part of the goal of that is to support them as they transition back into the community and to implement this community care plan that would be developed with their treatment team before they're released from the program. So some of the lessons that we've learned, Christy and I were laughing because it very much reflects the challenges that were discussed in the previous presentation. But some of the lessons that we've learned includes reducing barriers for individuals accessing treatment. We've recently implemented Drug Medi-Cal in San Francisco, and so we really wanted to have this work and the program aligned with that, partially thinking towards the future and continuing services through this program, but also so there aren't all these different processes in the city, and so to have a more consistent flow into our services. That being said, there are some challenges with individuals exiting the criminal justice system and having Medi-Cal to enroll in treatment or going through that process. And so one of the things that we have learned is really taking a step back and using this grant as an opportunity to be more flexible and seeing how we can reduce those barriers. Including maybe having a less detailed assessment early on so that people are able to go through that and enter into treatment as quickly as possible, particularly with being able to enter into treatment directly from custody. The other thing we found is around communication across referral sources and making sure that we are able to expand referral sources to our problem-solving courts. Through the Department of Public Health, we have a treatment access program. I recently talked to our public defender's office, who has a social work team to be able to make referrals to this program. So that has really expanded over our time of implementation. And having better communication around who is appropriate for the program. And something that we have found has been really helpful is facilitating those conversations, so taking the time to sit down with referral parties and our service providers so that there's a clear understanding and so that doesn't lead to frustration and a drop-off in referrals. The other thing that has been really complicated is that, we're really excited to be able to add so many beds into our system of care, but we found that it is not as simple as if you build it, they will come. And we've really found that the individuals have very complex needs, and particularly for individuals, and this is a struggle in San Francisco as it is in many places in California, for individuals experiencing homelessness going into a structured treatment setting. So we took these lessons learned and really built that into our Cohort 2 application to include broader services that includes residential treatment, but also includes low threshold services for that engagement and outreach so that we can more successfully transition people into longer term care. So with that, I will turn it over to Christy to talk about our evaluation, and then I'm sure at the end we're, of course, happy to answer any questions.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. I'm, as Angelica said, here to present preliminary findings from our 2-year evaluation report. Since the start of the grant, my company, Hatchell Tabernick and Associates, has been walking alongside SFDPH and their partners to conduct an evaluation of the Prosper program. And really our evaluation had two components. One was an outcome evaluation component, which was looking at progress toward intended goals and objectives. And the other was a process evaluation to look at the process of implementing the program and documenting successes, challenges, and lessons learned. To start with the outcomes, we collected data from December 2017 when we had the first referrals and enrollments in the program through March 2019, which was the last complete quarter for which we had complete data to analyze for this report. And we found that 5 of the intended project objectives have been met so far. We expected to see 96 individuals enrolled in residential treatment to meet our targets, and that's exactly what we had. We expected that 100% of community care plans would be individually tailored to each client, and that's true. We collect them upon completion, and they are very individualized with phone numbers, dates, references, and steps to reach goals that they've set for themselves around housing, education, and location. So they're very individually tailored. We expected that 90% of successful completers would be enrolled in Medi-Cal, and at this point in time, 89% of successful completers were enrolled in Medi-Cal, so we're counting that as a success. And we know that recidivism is a very important part of this grant, and so we have 2 goals. One is that there would be a 40% decrease in recidivism over baseline, and the other is that there would be 50% fewer jail bed days used over baseline. As Stacy pointed out, it's really too soon to be speaking to recidivism, but we did collect the data for this report, and so far we have seen 0 arrests and 0 convictions post-Prosper. So we're excited and encouraged by that, but again, it's kind of soon to really be making conclusive statements at this point. There are some goals which have not been as successful yet. We expected the occupancy rate to be 90%, and so far it's averaged 61%. So kind of as Angelica was stating, if you build it, it doesn't necessarily mean they will come. We're working on it. But so far the goal has not been achieved. We also expected that 50% of clients would successfully complete 3 to 6 months of treatment. So far it's been 37%. And we hoped that 100% of successful completers would leave with a community care plan. So far it's 78%. Shifting a little bit now to the process. And other outcomes that we were looking at outside of the stated goals and objectives for the grant. We have seen that participants are demonstrating an improved sense of well-being. We conduct surveys pre and post program enrollment, and we also have conducted 2 focus groups, and so far we're seeing statistically significant improvement in their sense of well-being. And also just a lot of comments that they've made demonstrate that they're very satisfied with the program and feeling better and more hopeful after completion. We've also found that there's a new coordinated system of care that's been developed in response to the need in the community. These partners have been all working toward addressing the need, but they haven't all worked together before. So this grant brought them an opportunity to work together, and they've been doing that. They've been very committed and dedicated. Nobody has ever missed an implementation team meeting, and they're really devoted to this work. And we've also found that project partners have demonstrated adaptability, flexibility, and responsivity to program challenges. Nobody gives up when things get challenging, and instead they all come to the table and troubleshoot and support one another, and just really, again, they're very committed to the work. Some challenges have surfaced, and these have come up in Angelica's presentation, and they're similar across several of the grantees. There were delays in contracting and hiring, which resulted in a delay in programming. And so I think we were eager to get started sooner and serve more people faster, but the delays did impact in the beginning. The referral and intake process took time to build and has had to be continually revisited and refined over time. We've been very responsive. We've seen new referral partners added and discussions around how to improve this, and we've seen an improvement. I was saying we received 4 referrals just yesterday, so it's picked up, but it took time. It also took time for partners to understand and embrace the process of collaborative community care planning. So back to the fact that 100% did not receive a community care plan upon exit, instead it was 78%. That was due to just never having worked together before and never filling out this form before. It was just something new for everybody, so it took time. And also, many participants have remained in residential treatment for longer than originally anticipated. That may not sound like a challenge on the surface, but actually our program was designed around the concept that after 3 to 6 months they would move on and be back in the community and need the support of RAMs, and that's not happening. Actually, Salvation Army is finding a way for them to stay a little bit longer through alternative funding sources, and they're finding the program is so valuable that they're staying on. So it's just shifted things a little bit. It's a little bit of a challenge, but it's also encouraging because they are staying and finding value. As much as our evaluation likes to try to express the power of what's going on in a program, I think there's nothing more powerful than a client testimonial. And I've included some here. I'll just read one to you. And this is my favorite. This is a testimonial from a focus group with Prosper participants. And this individual said, "I think what I like most about this program is the fact that I have hope back in my life. It's kind of like a fresh start, but I get to utilize everything that I have learned here and just to boost myself in the direction I want to go, and I can feel it actually starting to happen, like pieces falling into place." And comments like this give me hope that people can change and that programs like this really can work and make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
So these recidivism numbers are really spectacular, but I sort of paused because what was successful completion and what was the completion rate? That wasn't clear to me.
Right.
Who flunked out of the program?
Sorry, I have that in the report. It was not in our presentation. That's correct. I think with regard to recidivism data, I can tell you that we had information for 28 individuals who successfully completed the,
So if there are 96 on the program, does that mean 28 completed?
No, sorry, that's the recidivism data. I can give you the complete.
That's okay. I just, in general.
So it's all in our report.
Since the group you're measuring are only those who made it through the program,
yes.
It just wasn't clear to me who those people were and what the dropout issues were.
Sure. And so, again, we didn't put it in the presentation.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It is in the report, and all I can say is that the recidivism data we looked at was for 28 individuals who completed the program, whether they were successful or not. Those are people who have gone through our program, and that's the data we had. And among those individuals, among successful completers, people who stayed in the program for 3 to 6 months and met their program goals, there were 0 arrests and 0 convictions. Among those who were not successful completers, who dropped out of the program for various reasons, there were 4 arrests on record and only 1 conviction. So when we're looking at the actual successful completers, people who complete their treatment and meet their goals, that we have 0 arrests and 0 convictions. But it is very, very, very preliminary data, and they haven't been back in the community for very long because they are staying on in Salvation Army way longer than intended.
Thank you.
I would just add, in terms of some of the challenges of why people might not successfully complete the program, what we have found is that if people make it through their first month of the program, they're more likely to stay throughout the whole process. I think what's always challenging is sometimes individuals get to a program and the nature and the cyclical nature of substance use and struggling with that is that individuals may decide to leave at one point. One of the things I think Salvation Army does really well, and one of the benefits of having the social detox beds on site, is that if an individual relapses on substances, they don't immediately release them from the program. They may send them to their detox program for a period of time and then bring them back into treatment.
My question is somewhat of a curiosity, because it's a fidelity-based question. I'm always curious, because I think sometimes, a lot of times we come up short in fidelity. So I'm curious how you tracked your fidelity to the assessments, to the curriculum, that substance abuse or mental health. How did you track that, or did you? Were you able to?
Yeah, so in terms of the assessment, so I could say it varies a little bit depending on the referral source. So referrals that are coming directly from the Department of Public Health, there's supervisors and licensed staff that review all of the assessments to make sure that they meet medical necessity to be in a residential treatment program or in a social detox programs. And then I did introduce Robin Candler, who's our deputy director, and myself review other applications that come in and review them before authorizing them.
And then do you oversee the curriculum that's provided by CBOs and substance abuse, say? And, overseeing it, make sure that they're best practices, and then actually sitting in on groups to make sure they're following through with that?
Yeah, and I'll let Christy speak a little bit to that, but I could say one of our processes as a business unit with the Department of Public Health is that we have a business office of contract compliance. So all of those things are laid out in our contract, and then they have an annual visit to make sure that they are meeting those requirements and that what we're contracting for them to do is consistent, including things like not a fidelity assessment, but making sure that they're providing the groups and the treatment that we're contracting with them for.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anything additional?
Just one quick question, I apologize if it was answered already. Social detoxes, so you have 5 social detox, are those medically assisted detox? What is social detox?
They are not. So social detox differs from medical detox, and medical detox is primarily used for individuals who have heavy alcohol or opiate use and need the medical intervention to detox from substances. Social detox, alternatively, that isn't necessary. I will say we have a harm reduction system of care in San Francisco. Salvation Army is on that continuum, but tends to be more abstinence-based. Historically, they weren't open to individuals being on medication-assisted treatment. However, that has shifted for them within the last year. We've done a lot of training and support with them around that, and so that's expanded. So they are now accepting people who are on medication-assisted treatment. I should note around the social detox, I didn't mention this earlier, as you said, we had 5 social detox beds. In our second cohort that's increasing to 10, one of the lessons that we learned, particularly from law enforcement wanting to divert individuals from custody, is that they need more, need services that are outside of standard business hours. And so Salvation Army is going to be extending their admission hours into their social detox program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Are you going to do a closing, Ricardo, or is this just a harsh end? I'll take the harsh end. Speaking of harsh, I overlooked Aaron's legal report, and it was harsh for me, but the lighting was off, and we had many complications. I'm glaring. I thought I saw a tear, and so we're gonna allow for your expansive legal report now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just briefly, you may have noticed in your agenda, we have a couple of RFPs we're going to be releasing today, as well as some funding recommendations for Title II. And I'd ask you to look at those. If we have any recusals, we'll announce those at this time coming. I'm hoping I checked in with a couple of our members. I don't think we're going to have recusals, and I hope we don't, because we're very close to our not being able to conduct business, but we'll work around that if we have to. Just a brief update as well. We did have a closed session on the agenda for today. I don't think we'll have to go into that. That refers to the third lawsuit that the California Department of Justice has filed against the federal government related to our JAG funding. Not much to update on that. They're trying to expedite sort of the briefing schedule in that case because This is the third time the lawsuit has been filed, and the state keeps winning, so they think they can reach some sort of quick settlement or stipulation with respect to the other outstanding issues that are in that case. I did also want to mention briefly, on October 31st, the Ninth Circuit came down with a decision with regards to the City of Los Angeles' lawsuit with respect to their local JAG grant. The same legal issues that the state has raised with our JAG grants were similarly briefed by the City of Los Angeles. They were successful in maintaining their JAG grant, and the Ninth Circuit also basically held that the U.S. Department of Justice does not have the legal authority to impose special conditions related to immigration for the local JAG funds. So that legal decision should apply to our JAG funds as well, which is good news, which means that we should continue to be able to spend our JAG funds down unless and until the United States Supreme Court intervenes. The California Department of Justice case has oral argument in December. That's still going to resolve issues regarding the legality of 8 U.S.C. 1373, which is the information sharing provisions with regard to the immigration conditions. So that we'll have that update hopefully for you in February. And with that, I think that concludes my legal report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. We're going to now turn to the consent items. There is one on the agenda, but as I move to that, I invite anyone in the audience that would like to make public comment to give us a public comment card to Tracy or Adam at the front of the room. The cards are on the back table over there, and I move to approval of the minutes from the September 21st, 2019 meetings.
Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
First, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Moving now to the, any public comment on that? Good, it went smoothly. Moving now to action items on the agenda. Item B, STC compliance report. I think we have Yvonne here to present on that.
So good morning. I'm Yvonne Garner with the Standards and Training for Corrections Division, more commonly known as STC. Agenda item B is STC's annual report. It is an information item only and focuses on program data from the last fiscal year and compliance findings, as well as provides an update on where we are with the new training standards that were adopted by this board earlier this year. I'll start with some of our program data, and you can also refer to this data in attachment 1 on your agenda. So the STC program is responsible for setting standards for the selection and training of local corrections personnel working for sheriff's offices, probation departments, and police departments. Additionally, we set the standards for 7 modified community correctional facilities under contract with CDCR. In fiscal year 2018 and 2019, 160 agencies participated in the STC program. This is one less than last year because the Fullerton Police Department changed its jail to a temporary holding facility and was no longer eligible to participate. Those agencies employed nearly 33,000 local correctional staff. We also have 276 private providers who deliver STC certified training to agency staff. Those agencies administered nearly 14,000 of the STC entry-level selection exam to fill vacancies throughout the year. The number of exams, as you can see here, has declined in recent years in correlation with a small decline in the number of total positions statewide. Within that, you can see a slight growth in the number of the ACO positions and declines in the number of probation officer and juvenile corrections officer positions. As you can also see in the shaded blue area, the biggest change is in the juvenile correction officer positions. There were 2,000 fewer exams administered last year and 300 fewer JCO positions last year. And this can be attributed in part to declining juvenile populations and in some cases the closing or repurposing of juvenile halls. STC's minimum training standards required almost 1.3 million hours of training last year. This is the minimum number of training hours required by the STC standard, but we find during our compliance review process that the actual number of training tends to be substantially higher since many agencies exceed the STC minimum standard. So shifting now into compliance, just try to get it all on there all at once. All agencies that participate in the STC program must meet STC's training standards. These standards require that all employees complete a prescribed course of training within the first year of hire and a defined number of training hours every year thereafter. The specific requirements vary based on classification. Each year, STC conducts an on-site review of every participating agency's training records to ensure that those training standards are met. With nearly 33,000 staff statewide, as I'm sure you can imagine, it is impossible to review every training record, so STC reviews a random sample of training files. As part of the compliance review process, agencies are also required to do an internal audit and identify any employee that does not meet the training requirements. We include those employees in our sample as well, and the results of our review of those training records are used to determine compliance status. STC has a 100% compliance requirement. To be found in compliance, all of an agency's employees must have completed the required STC training or met one of STC's criteria for exception, which you can see listed there on the left-hand column. That criteria includes circumstances such as medical or other types of leave during the year, which make it impossible or extremely difficult for employees to complete the required training. If an agency fails to train all of its employees and does not meet STC's criteria for exceptions, the agency is found to be out of compliance. For fiscal year 2018-2019, 152 agencies were found to be in compliance and 8 agencies were found to be out of compliance. And you can see a list of those agencies on attachments 2 and 3 of your agenda item. 2 of those agencies are out of compliance for a second consecutive year. Within those out of compliance findings, we found 9 staff who did not complete the core training requirement and 39 staff who did not complete the annual training requirement. Agencies that are found out of compliance are required to submit a corrective action plan, and STC staff conduct quarterly reviews to monitor their progress toward that plan. In addition, for agencies that are found out of compliance for a second consecutive year, their STC funds are withheld until the end of each quarter to allow staff to review their progress before releasing the funds. All of the agencies found out of compliance have completed a corrective action plan that will be monitored by their assigned field rep to help them come into compliance in the current year, and we are confident that all of them will be able to do so. In addition to our regular program activities and compliance review process, STC has been working on implementing the new core training standards that were approved by this board in January of this year. We're currently in a voluntary compliance period to provide adequate time for agencies to revise all of their training curriculum to include the new requirements. And I'd like to give a shout out to Tulare Sheriff as the first agency to get a course certified with the new requirements. They successfully delivered that course in September, and many other agencies and providers are currently working on their revisions and are close to being certified and delivering the new content. And we're also working on moving those changes through the regulation revision process with an effective date of July 1st of next year. And at that point, the new standards will become mandatory for all agencies. So in reminder, those new standards revised all of the core training programs and created 6 new transfer academies to accommodate staff transferring from one classification to another. So that's just up there as a reminder for you all. As you may also recall, the biggest change was the addition of a greatly expanded behavioral health module within all of the core courses. in addition to expanding topics already included such as suicide prevention and response, substance use disorder, and signs and symptoms of mental illness. The module includes new content in trauma, stigma and bias, liability, safety, emotional survival, and interventions, resources, and referrals. In response to recommendations from the work groups and the ESC, who felt that it was important to provide more structure and standardization to the training, STC facilitated the design of complete lesson plans for the behavioral health unit. Those lesson plans are now complete and have been made available to the field. Agencies are currently incorporating this new content into their core academies, and we're also really pleased to see that many of them are also certifying the class to be given to existing staff as annual training. So the last thing I'd like to note, is the investment that the state has made in local training this year. That investment has helped agencies meet all of these new training demands. SCC funding was increased by just over $6 million this year, and this board approved an additional $7 million for mental health training through the JAG award. We are currently working with agencies on implementing that training, and agencies have until September of 2020 to use the money and deliver that training to their staff, and we'll report back to this board after the conclusion of that period on the results. So this concludes the SCC annual report. Are there any questions?
Anything from board members? The Tulare sheriff did the curriculum.
Well,
Not correct.
I'm not competing. Good drill. No, I want to just thank Yvonne. Obviously, some agencies are out of compliance. I know from obviously running a jail for years, it is difficult sometimes to maintain that compliance. I appreciate the way that the board approved changing away from the partial compliance and so on. But I wanted to thank you for that and your field personnel. And then also, on a different topic, since she's up there, I want to thank the active BSCC and STC for their partnership in the Jail Command Academy. I know Allison too, sitting back there, she was a big part of getting that started a few years ago. It's a partnership between BSCC, California State Sheriffs, and the American in Jail Association. And we just completed the third Jail Command Academy. And what we're really trying to do with that partnership is trying to provide advanced training to our jail leadership around the state. And it's been a great program, and we appreciate the partnership there.
And we're excited about it as well, and looking forward to certifying that as a replacement for Vermont, that we're hoping in the very near future.
And I think, certainly I want to, tack on to what he's saying, thank you for the heavy lift. Also, the compliance should be noticed, the massive compliance there is across the state of California, and in the counties that have a non-compliance rating, often they're one staff out of agencies that have hundreds of staff. So I think that is to be noted and appreciated. The training expansion this year, the hard look at mental health issues, the deep dive that we continue to do into ensuring that our training is meaningful and timely. I appreciate all that you've done on that. I appreciate county probation departments and jails alike adapting to the new standard. When you add hours to training modules, it has impacts. They're fiscal and staffing, and to get a universal approval of doing that, I think represents to this board the commitment they have to excellence as they move forward. Certainly, everybody's quick to point out problems associated with running jails and probation departments across the state, and I just think there's a lot of goodwill towards doing it the right way, and I appreciate you doing this report today. Anybody else? Matters of this must have somebody in the public that wants to discuss it. Anybody? Who do
Yes,
we have?
Madam Chair, we have Dominic Nong from the Children's Defense Fund.
Dominic Nong, we've been seeing a lot of you lately. I feel like you were here yesterday. That was you.
Hi, good morning. Dominique Nong from the Children's Defense Fund, California. I want to fully acknowledge and appreciate the work that the Standards and Training division has done into revising the standards that are effective 2020. However, I would still urge the BSCC and the division to examine closely whether these standards and these curricula are sufficiently robust to protect the safety of facility staff and incarcerated people. And I say this for two main reasons. One is that it shows that LA probation has been found in compliance. And yet recent in-depth investigations by our local Office of Inspector General uncovered disturbing uses of force, including inappropriate and avoidable uses of chemical spray. And one of the main findings of this OIG report was that lack of adequate training contributed to out-of-policy uses of force and over-reliance on OC spray. And the conclusion reached by the OIG was conducted after multiple interviews with staff at all levels, including line staff and including entry-level staff. And the staff did report both to the OIG and actually very publicly at the Board of Supervisors meetings that they felt ill-equipped to effectively deal with and interact with youth. And nearly a quarter of the OIG recommendations from this investigation deal with the need to improve training, including having a comprehensive, fully integrated training curriculum and presentations. And this all happened while LA probation was found in compliance. And so I would ask the STC to look more closely in this board at how they can make compliance a more meaningful measure of whether staff are adequately trained. And the second reason I bring this up is because of the many recent disturbing reports about what's going on in treatment inside many of our county jails. And although that so far they have been framed in terms of minimum standards, they clearly have implications for the way that staff are trained as well. Thank you.
And I think bearing comment on this, of course, STC, BSCC, our inspections are all minimum standards. We absolutely understand that it's not a perfect system. Sheriffs and probation chiefs across the state continue to improve that. I think our governor stated yesterday that he's looking at, or was it this morning? It was this morning, that they're looking at, some expansion of our, inspections across the state of California. I don't think your sentiments fall on deaf ears, and we're all working towards the same ultimate goal. And that said, I'd ask the board if you have any further comments on that. Hearing none, we will move on to item, where are we? Well, you're not gonna make it hard on me. The staff is so quick, or don't trust me. The Youth Reinvestment Grant, and good morning, Kim.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here on Throwback Thursday. Wow.
Throwback Thursday.
It feels exciting to shake things up a little. Really, I've been with this agency for over 12 years, and this is the first time I've experienced a snafu like this, so kudos to our outstanding IT staff. And good morning to all of you, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Kimberly Bouchard. I'm a field representative in the Corrections Planning and Grant Program Division. And in this agenda item, I'm requesting your approval of the request for proposals developed by the Youth Reinvestment Grant Executive Steering Committee. The ESC was chaired by board member David Steinhardt and included 15 other members from various disciplines and locations. So I'm sure many of you recall that we recently were here. Oh,
Pause you right there, I apologize. Madam Chair, our board member, Mr. Baranko, because CBOs are eligible for this, and Mr. Baranko sits on the board of a CBO, we're going to ask him to recuse himself and sit out of the room.
And just to further down that rickety road, do we have a quorum without Judge Baranko?
Yes, we do.
So Mike Ertel would have left, but it's not a recusal leave.
I don't think you should bring up his personal issues right here.
Never mind.
Never mind. No, he wasn't recused. How's that? Okay, do you hear?
Are we good to go? I don't need to wait for a chief or two.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, so I was just mentioning that we were just recently here in June, as a matter of fact, seeking your approval for the funding recommendations on the first round of Youth Reinvestment Grant awards. So with these two rounds of funding coming so close together, we made a concerted effort to bring back the ESC members that had just worked on the first cohort. And I'm happy to say that we were able to get 7 of those members to return and work with us on this second RFP. So if you're interested in seeing the full roster of that RFP, it is included in your binders as attachment C2. So the ESC met on September 18th and 19th and went through a process of decision-making in order to inform the grant development work for this RFP. And I'll just take a minute here to note that this, again, as I was just talking about in terms of the returning ESC members, this is not a brand new grant. We had funding earlier this year that was awarded, and now we have new funding. And there weren't a tremendous number of changes to the legislation that enables this program. However, there were some important changes, and as we move through the slides in a minute here, we'll talk more specifically about those. So all in all, the ESC in their meeting made a tremendous contribution of time and effort. I'm happy to present to you the product of their hard work. So moving on here, looking at the highest level, the Youth Reinvestment Grant Program, as in the first round, continues to seek to divert youth from entering the juvenile justice system or from furthering their involvement in that system. And it does that by targeting youth who are under the age of 18, youth who are in underserved communities or communities where there are few or no existing diversion options, as well as targeting areas where there are high rates of juvenile arrest or high rates of racial and ethnic disparities.
Kim, just one quick comment. It's also targeting youth over 18 who are under continuing juvenile court jurisdiction.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I actually meant to note, yeah, that's right. And also, for youth who are enrolled in a program before they're 18, they're always allowed to complete their program even though they turn 18 during the course of the program. Okay, so then looking a little bit at the RFP and the focus here, the intent or the goal was to allow for a lot of flexibility with the idea that local needs and the availability of local resources and just given the overall landscape of any given applicant would be able to drive the program. So it's allowable for applicants to present a variety of different diversion approaches. It's also allowable for an applicant to look at and include multiple points of entry along the juvenile justice continuum. All that being said, these grants are still required to be trauma-informed, evidence-based, culturally relevant, and developmentally appropriate. For the eligible applicants, now we start to move into an area where this go-around is different than the first round of funding. So just as a quick reminder, in the first round, it was only cities and counties that were eligible to apply for these funds. And they then needed to designate a lead public agency who would receive 10% of the award and take on an administrative role. And then also designate one or more CBOs as a pass-through agency that would actually provide diversion services and receive 90% of the funding. So what we have for this particular RFP are eligible applicants fall into 2 categories. Nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply directly this year. And then we also have local government entities that are eligible to apply. However, any government agencies that receive funding through this grant are still required to pass through 90% of those funds to community-based organizations that would be the actual service providers. With this grant, there's a required 25% match. However, the legislation does allow for a lower 10% match. in those jurisdictions where there's high need coupled with little or no existing diversion infrastructure. So let's look at the funding that's available for this grant. We have a total of $10.9 million available for this round, and that's made up of $5 million in new funding that was included in the 2019 Budget Act. And it also includes $5.9 million that's available from unawarded funds in the first round. So if I can just take you back for a minute, the Executive Steering Committee in round one of this grant felt it was really important that we be funding high quality proposals with these funds. So they adopted a scoring threshold of 60%. So that means that any proposal to be funded under this grant must receive at least 60% of the total available points. That is, again, the case this time. But what that meant in the first round was that although we had enough applications overall that we could have awarded the full $35 million, there weren't enough highly scored proposals to fully expend those funds. So we did end that process with a balance of $5.9 million, and that will now be rolled into the overall pot to give us $10.9 for this round.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does the threshold exist in the second RFP also?
It sure does.
And it's 60% again?
Yes, that's right. So now we'll look at that $10.9 million in a little different way. And I just want to draw attention here that we're looking at a total of $10.5 million that's available for funding new grants. But we do also have $400,000 of that total that's available to the DSCC for our administrative costs. And that includes funding the outside statewide evaluation that's required for this grant. And I'll just take a minute to note here, for those who may not have heard, we did a competitive process to award that statewide evaluation contract as well. And the winner of that is Sac State. So we're working with the Institute of Social Research at Sac State on this grant, and it's been nice to be working with our local university on that. So looking forward to good things.
Quick question. Is that, is Sac State performing the evaluation for round 2 or both rounds 1 and 2?
That decision has not been made yet, so at this point, their contract only includes the first round.
Okay.
The decision has not been made yet. So another competitive process to be awarding round 2, is that what we're
Yeah, I did talk with them initially, just to get sort of a ballpark feel of if we added, a handful or 2 of new grantees, what would that look like? Could you use the same model and incorporate these new grantees in? So I think what would be most expeditious as well as most logical would be to amend that contract and be able to have Sac State enfold the new grantees as well in the same process. And I think we're going to be able to explore doing that, and early indications are that we would be able to do that. Okay, so then looking at the funding available at an individual applicant level, there is a minimum award amount of $50,000, and there's a maximum of $2 million per application. So when we consider that there's only $10.5 million available overall for this second round of funding, and we have a per applicant maximum of $2 million, we could be looking at only adding a few more grants to this YRG. So when the ESC talked about this, there was a lot of interest in not funding the same programs again, and in looking at expanding the number of applicants, expanding the number of service providers, and of course ultimately expanding the number of youth participants. So for this second round of funding, entities that received the 2018 YRG funds either directly as an applicant or indirectly as a pass-through agency are ineligible for funding in this new round. For those grantees, the successful applicants who are awarded funds this time, the grants will be for 3 years, and we're expecting those to begin on July 1 of next year and to run through June 30th of 2023. So let's look at the funding categories for this grant. Again, the ESC was interested in trying to get this funding into some smaller communities, perhaps rural communities, and also looking at providing opportunities for applicants that may be doing a smaller scale project versus a larger scale project. So what we see here is the funds are split into 3 distinct categories. So we've got a total of $2.5 million that will be available for small requests, and that includes applications that are requesting less than $600,000. We also have $4 million that's set aside for medium requests, which are those proposals that would be from $600,000 up to $1.2 million. And then finally, we've got $4 million that's available for large requests, which in this case is defined as more than 1.2 million and up to 2 million. So I also want to make a note here that in the event that we don't receive enough highly scoring proposals to fully expend the funds in any of these 3 categories, we would simply look at an overall rating of the proposals and fund the next highest rated proposals overall without respect to size of the request. Okay. All right, so with that, hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we're looking at with this second round of funding for the Youth Reinvestment Grant and what the RFP will do. Today, I'm asking for your approval of the request for proposals as presented by the Youth Reinvestment Grant ESC, and of course also your approval to release the RFP to the field. Any questions?
Well, if there are no questions, just some brief comments as, since I was the chair of this. This is a very interesting set of grants because it's about diversion. I'm not sure that word came up in the presentation. And there's been high interest from certain legislators in funding and refunding juvenile justice diversion programs. So these grants are going to support models that run across a range of points at which kids come into the system. They're funding police level diversion programs, probation level, DA level, and some very innovative programs in the first round. Now that CBOs can apply directly, that changes the game a bit, and we're going to get applications where we don't know what we're going to see. So there's not that much money to go around this time. We might get a lot of applications just because the applicant pool could be a lot bigger. So it'll be interesting. I will say that the ESC did a great job. New and old members alike, it went very smoothly. We had to adapt to the CBO can apply directly part of it. And you know, it went very well. And I want to thank Kim, you, and Casey, and the other staff for helping us along. So that's it.
I actually do have a question. The threshold that you had previously, did you utilize the same scoring methods you're going to use in the new one, which is you'll then award the next in line in terms of highest score following all the awards?
Want me to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm not sure if I totally tracked on all of that. The rating
It wasn't a
factors.
good question, but I think you know what I'm asking. You have 3 categories you're going to fund: small, medium, and large.
Right.
And then you're going to move to awarding the highest scoring grants that are above the minimum threshold.
Yes, that's right.
Did you utilize that same practice in RFP 1, or is it new to RFP 2?
Well, there was a different rollover process between small, medium, and large areas. So if small got exhausted, it rolled into the next category. But this isn't divided up by geography for a whole bunch of reasons.
Understood.
Yeah.
My question is, I mean, I'm
So it's
interested in as
it's
much
different.
money getting out into the field as possible. When you have a minimum scoring threshold, that prohibits that somewhat, albeit for a very good reason. So,
I just don't think you're gonna see that happen this time because we have fewer dollars, presumably a lot more applications, and the money will roll to the next highest scoring proposal. So
Yeah, and I would just
I think we're gonna
add,
be good here.
the cap this time is 2 million versus 1 last time. So I think we'll go through the money more quickly, but in direct answer to your question, we did have the categories for last year and then the rest rolled to the highest rated proposals overall. But as David said, 35 million last time versus 10 this time. I don't see money left on the table this go around.
all right, good. That's what we like here. Don't leave any money laying around, okay? Anybody else on the board? Anybody public comment on this issue before we?
Madam Chair, we do have 2 public comments. We have Alice Lee and Miguel Garcia.
Well, welcome, I assume you're Alice coming forward?
Actually, it's Celeste.
Celeste?
Yes.
Well, then, we're gonna have to have you sit down and we're gonna have to find out.
Where I'm sitting. Just kidding. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie. I'm here on behalf of Next Gen Policy. I just had a quick question for Ms. Kempley. I'm quite very first name. So I was just wondering, for the scoring requirement or criteria for the grants, is that visible to applicants prior to submitting their application for the grant, or is that something that's kind of kept internally?
It's in the RFP. Yeah, all the rating factors as well as the individual criteria are included in the RFP.
What was it?
Well, that was easy, all right. If you find Alice, send her back, okay? Looking for the next public comment?
Good morning, honorable members and Madam Chair. My name is Miguel Garcia. I'm the policy coordinator with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. My comment is just like when thinking about the Youth Reinvestment Grant, I think community partnerships is essential to the diversion opportunity and the lightest touch. As we speak about diversion, knowing that it could occur in multiple facets when incarcerating youth. So I think that just my comment is if it could occur and we could see post-arrest and post-charge, pre-charge, I think that those are the most effective ways in seeing these dollars spent, as well as the outreach to rural communities that may not have access or funding to dollars. So just wanting to make sure that this is advertised to those communities as well, but thinking bold about the partnerships with CBOs. Thank you.
Thank you, good seeing you again. Any further?
That is all.
That's it. Okay, back to the board. Any further comments? Looking for a motion, a second?
I'll make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation.
Second?
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Let the abstention stand with Judge Branco, who's been out of the room during this entire process. I believe the motion carries. Thank you all. Thank you, Kimberly, for all your hard work. But I know you're staying. I am. Let's wait. Let's let the judge get back.
Do we have any recusals for this item?
Seeing that.
Okay, so this next agenda item is much like the last one in that I am requesting your approval of the included request for proposals. In this case, the RFP is for the Tribal Youth Diversion Grant. And the Tribal Youth Diversion RFP was developed by an executive steering committee chaired by Probation Chief Michael Ritola. The ESC has 4 other members in addition to Chief Ritola, and we were fortunate to have 2 members of last year's Tribal Advisory Group return and work with us on the new RFP for this round. So again, if you would like to see that full roster, we have included it in your binders, and that can be found as attachment D2. So for the Tribal Youth Diversion Grant, the ESC met on September 24th and developed the framework for the RFP that you have before you today. As was the case with the Youth Reinvestment Grant, this grant was just here before you for the first round of awards in June. So we see again a scenario where there weren't very many programmatic changes to the legislation, but there were some important changes. So we'll look at those in a short PowerPoint that I have for you.
One moment.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with this one, we're going to start out looking at the funding that's available. And what we have that was included in this latest Budget Act is a total of $10 million available for this Tribal Youth Diversion Grant. And of that 10 million, we've got 9.7 million that's available directly for new grants. And then we also have 300,000 that's available for our use here for the BSCC's administrative costs. So like the first round, these grant funds are intended to support diversion programs for Indian children, and the programs that are funded are required to be trauma-informed, community-based, and health-based in nature. Again, this go-around, the only eligible applicants are federally recognized tribes in California. The maximum request amount per tribe or per applicant is 1.4 million. So here's where we start to see some of the new features of this RFP. In the first round of funding for this grant, we only had a total of 1.1 million available. Some of you may recall that it was actually carved out of the Youth Reinvestment Grant in the first round. This time it's its own standalone program, and there's, again, the total of 9.7 for grants. So the ESC felt that it was important to establish a maximum request amount per applicant. And it was decided ultimately that that would be set at 1.4 million. So there are regional applications that are allowed, and so that maximum amount is per applicant or per tribe. So when we get into a situation where we have a regional application, we see that that 1.4 million could increase based on the number of federally recognized tribes that are part of a regional approach. So as an example, if we have a regional application where 2 federally recognized tribes are working together, the total request amount in that would be 2.8 million. So also in regards to regional applications, I wanted to quickly note that the ESC felt that collaboration was important and desirable, and chose to include preference points for regional applications. And as was seen with the last grant, there were funding categories established for this tribal youth diversion grant. In this case, the split is 50-50 between urban and rural applicants. So we've got, again, a total of 9.7 million. Half of that will be available for urban applicants and half will be available for rural applicants. And those applicants that are selected for funding will be able to use this grant over the span of 3.5 years. And we're looking at beginning those new grants next July 1st and then running those through the end of December in 2023. The target population, and this is unchanged from last year, we're looking at trying to get these diversion services out to Indian children who are under 18, those who are facing entry to the juvenile justice system, or looking at further involvement in that system. And in particular for this grant, we're looking at targeting areas where the youth are experiencing high rates of juvenile arrest, high rates of suicide, high rates of alcohol and substance abuse, and low high school graduation rates. Diversion services, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, under this grant need to be trauma-informed, community-based, and health-based. And I just wanted to take a minute on this last slide here to point out a couple of nuances with this RFP, because there was some discussion in the ESC meetings about some special features that were important to include with this being a tribal diversion program. So for any programs that are funded under this grant, trauma-informed diversion services must include issues of historical trauma. And similarly, any health-based approaches that are to be funded under this grant must be grounded in an overall wellness approach rather than just a traditional medical model. So that is my brief summary of the Tribal Youth Diversion Grant. And again, I would just point out the new features from that are different from the first go-around include the maximum funding level of $1.4 million per applicant, the category split for funding between urban and rural, and then I forgot to mention this earlier, with this RFP, because there's so much more funding available this time than there was in the first round, the ESC did choose to adopt a 60% scoring threshold for this grant as well. So with that overview, today I'm asking for your approval of the request for proposals as developed by the Executive Steering Committee, and also asking for your approval to release the RFP to the field.
To the board, questions or comments?
Just a comment on how exciting it is to have 10 million versus 1.5 million was.
That's a lot.
In this round, so that's really exciting. The Executive Steering Committee, even though small, nice to have some new and old. The expertise was wonderful. I learned a lot in our first round of conversations. And then just a big thank you to Kim and Casey and your staff for always being well prepared and just making it so easy on the Executive Steering Committee. So
thank you.
Really looking forward to reading all these.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, great appreciation for all the work you're doing, and kudos to you and to you, Mike, for picking up the ball for the board again and leading the ESC. It's a good job. I actually extend that again to you, Mr. Steinhardt, who's always ready and willing. Anybody from the public wish to comment on this item?
You do not have public comment.
Back to the board, I'm looking for a motion in a second.
So moved. I'll second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Motion carries, thank you.
Thank you all, and thanks so much to both David and Mike.
All right, Tim, welcome. the Title II funding recommendations.
So to Kimberly's comment about Throwback Thursday as a PG&E client, I'm just happy that the buildings are on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be even more difficult.
Give me a second here. So, do we have any recusals for this point?
I'm looking at our council.
I don't believe we do, but I would just ask the members to take a look. It's page 4 of the agenda item, which is the list of the proposed entities recommended for funding. And if you see anyone you recognize, including yourself, let us know. You can step out, but I think we're good to go on this one.
Anybody? All right.
Well, I need to clarify, you asked if we, what was the threshold, do we recognize anyone?
Anti-recidivism coalition doesn't count.
Okay, we currently have a contract with the anti-recidivism coalition.
Yeah, that doesn't count, so, but appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Timothy Kolasic, field representative in the ESCC Division of Crisis Planning and Grant Programs. Today I'm presenting agenda item E, which is a request for approval of the Title II Grant Program funding recommendation. This agenda item requests board approval of the Title II Grant Program funding awards developed by the Title II Grant Program Executive Steering Committee and also approved by the State Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice Employment Prevention, also known as the SACJAB. Both of the rosters for the ESC and the SACJAB are in your materials as attachment E1 and E2 respectively. And I also want to give a special thanks to the co-chairs, Rachel Rios and Chief Michelle Sprague-Brown, both members of the SACJAB, and also the ESC members themselves. So it's a pleasure to work with through the process and do quite a bit of work over the last year. So this Title II grant cycle will be funded from prior years of unspent funds and from the California's federal fiscal year 2018, 2019, and 2020 Title II awards. The amount of the first year is $3,991,561. The funding amount for our federal fiscal year 2020 is not yet known. All grant awards are contingent upon California receiving its federal awards and will be reduced proportionately if federal funding is reduced in future years. The Title II Grant Program RFP was initially released on April 11, 2019, and if you recall, withdrawn on April 12th to address concerns regarding applicant eligibility. The Title II Grant Program RFP was re-released on June 14, 2019, with proposals due on August 9th, 2019. Also, at the same time, April 11, 2019, the Travel RFP was released and had set aside of $100,000 annually, or $300,000 for the 3-year grant cycle. At the time of closing, June 7th, we received no proposals. The RFP was re-released along with the Title II RFP on June 14, 2019, with again no proposals received by the new closing date of August 9, 2019. So on November 12, 2019, the SACJAB approved a recommendation to the board to use the unspent funds from the Travel Youth proposal to further fund the Title II applicants, with exception for the mandatory travel set aside of $5,782 unless the Title II proposal is otherwise eligible to expend these funds. So turning your attention to PowerPoint. So, as you may know, the the Title II program is a federally funded grant program through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. Within Title II, there are two specific requirements. One is that we develop a 3-year state plan, which the current 3-year state plan was approved by the board, and then also the state to develop a state advisory committee, which the previous mentioned SACJAB is that state advisory committee. So the intent of within the state plan of this grant program is to provide alternatives to detention, promote youth safety and well-being while in custody, and identify and support successful and emerging reentry models. So eligible applicants for this RFP include units of government, including individual agencies or departments within a city and county or a school district, private nonprofit agencies, organizations, or institutions, or federally recognizing Indian tribes. Program purpose areas for this, for the RFP were aftercare and reentry, alternatives to detention and placement, community-based programs, diversion, mental health services, mentoring, counseling, and training programs. And I also want to add that the applicants were required within their proposals to address racial and ethnic disparity and describe how their program would actually address to reduce the overrepresentation of it within the juvenile justice system. Key components of the grant are that, or the RFP, were that the target population is juveniles under the age of 26. The grant period should be approved to cover December 1st, 2019 through November 30th, 2022. Again, there's approximately $4 million available annually. Each proposal had a three-year request that may not exceed $1,050,000 or $350,000 annually. And we also had a minimum funding threshold or minimum scoring threshold of 66% of total available points. This grant also had a 70% pass-through with the exception of NGOs and travel applicants that provided direct services. There was no match requirement. And then we did have a special small county population category where the highest scoring proposal that meets the minimum scoring threshold providing services to a small county population would be funded. And then also, as mentioned, the Title II Tribal RFP was released April 11th with no proposals received. Again, the SACJAB is requesting to move those funds back into this funding area to further the Title II projects. So for the funding summary, we had 30 proposals requesting over $29.8 million. Two of the proposals submitted in the small county population category. And then there was an interesting component here to this RFP as well, where the SACJAB intended that each program purpose area should receive funding. So this table here is also, if it was hard to read there, it's also within your materials as attachment E3. So highlighted in green, you'll see that within the small county population category, the highest scoring small category applicant that met the threshold actually finished at number 4 in the scoring, which is Yuba County Office of Education. So they're highlighted in green there. No movement was necessary. But then also with the intention of the SACJAB to address and fund each program purpose area, we did have one program purpose area, which was alternatives to detention, was not addressed until the highest eligible applicant being at number 17, fathers and families of San Joaquin. So they were moved up into the fully funded number 11 slot within this funding recommendation. So in all total, we have 1 school district, 9 nonprofits, and 2 government agencies recommended for funding. So on behalf of the Title II Grant Program, ESP, and the SACJAB, staff recommends the board take the following actions. Approve the recommendations as adopted by the SACJAB at its November 12th, 2019 meeting. Approve the additional recommendation by the SACJAB to reallocate the $300,000 originally for the Title II Tribal RFP to further fund the Title II Grant Program projects. Authorize staff to continue to make awards from the proposal rank order list if any applicant is unable to accept the award or relinquishes an award, first by offering to any partial awardee. Authorize staff to continue to make awards as noted if determined during the follow-up award-making process that an applicant recommended for an award is ineligible or if a grantee becomes ineligible during the grant cycle. And finally, authorize staff to further fund with unspent prior year grant cycle funds that becomes available should any reversion of these funds occur.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the board? Any questions, comments from the public?
We have no public comment.
We'll be back to the board. I'm looking for a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you for all your hard work. Appreciate it. And go team. Moving now to the public comment portion of the meeting, which allows for comments on any items that are not on the agenda that you wish to speak of. We ask, we have any, and limit those to 3 minutes each.
We have Brian Goldstein.
This is not personal, Brian, he's gotta go.
Good morning, Brian Goldstein with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. I just want to speak briefly about the Facility Standards Regulations process by BSCC. This regulations process is critical for this agency. With that being said, CJCJ has long had concerns about how the BSCC has developed these standards and conducted facility inspections. Now, we've engaged extensively with this process, most recently with the Title 15 and 24 Juvenile Facility Regulation Standards. We took this process seriously, and we expected that the BSCC did as well. That being said, there are still some lingering questions that we had at the end of that process. We wondered, what happens next? The standards have been developed. What's the BSCC's role? What does the inspections process look like? And what if staff find something wrong? What if they find something wrong within one of the facilities they inspect across California? Well, recently we found that answer. An article published by the SACB and ProPublica, which I brought copies of. I would encourage the board members to read it. I would encourage the public to read it. It's very disturbing. In Kern County, the sheriff relies heavily on safety cells, keeping individuals there for 8 days consecutively. He's removed mattresses. Inmates are sleeping on yoga pads. Suicides have gone up, while the BSCC has inspected these facilities. So we go back to our original question. Well, what happens? Well, the BSCC inspectors saw this. They noted these concerns in their inspections report. Unfortunately, seemingly very little has been done to address these issues. Now, in the article, BSCC staff say, we are not enforcement. They also note their partnership with law enforcement. But what about their recognition and responsibility for individuals who are incarcerated in jails across California? What of the BSCC's role as the leading state agency in California, conducting inspections every day? These compliance issues, or lack of compliance issues, frankly, they're not communicated to the public in an effective way. They're not communicated to policymakers. And I do not believe that these inspections issues are being communicated to the board. So we're left with a final question, which is how can you have any confidence in this inspections process given these issues? Thank you.
Thank you. And I would simply state, after those remarks, that, you know, we have, I think the board is well aware of the articles that have been in the paper, and certainly even as recent as this morning, the comments of the governor, and we are given our authority by a power greater than this board, and I think when asked to do additional functions made by our recommendations from the legislature or the governor's office, the agency is willing and ready to do just that. We do not know what the scope of this will look like. We certainly don't approve of anybody landing in harm's way or treated inhumanely by any jail in the state. And appreciating you raising the issue, but I take issue with some of the fashion you explained yourself in, because I don't think that there's a tacit approval of any of that by this body. Anybody on the board want to comment?
I'm so familiar with the enforcement side of the juvenile inspections, and I'm just trying to remind myself, do we have the same corrective action plan approach on the jail side?
It's not identical. It is characterized differently in that we will do the inspections. If we find exceptions, we will work towards the jail dealing with what's going on. That's sort of not an elegant way of saying that, but it is what it is, and it does not have, we're not regulatory in the fashion I think you might see an inspector general or somebody else like that. There's going to do those kinds of inspections, so we continue to grapple with that. Not asking for that authority by any ways or means, but we will see what the legislature or the governor's office see fit.
Well, I mean, just looking at the juvenile justice side, which I do know, there is kind of an end line for what the Board of State and Community Corrections can do given a violation of a standard that's inspected and reported back. And there's a corrective action plan process. But the end of that story is that the facility can be declared to be unsuitable, and that's the end of it. Then it's up to the private attorney generals and somebody else to take the enforcement, ball down the track a little more. So it's really been a legislative issue that has not been resolved or pushed farther on the juvenile justice side. And I know that leaves on the juvenile justice side a lot of people frustrated and disappointed in what we can and can't do. And Brian, you were a participant, we did a great job of improving those standards and tightening them up. A lot of work was put into that, and thanks to you and other community members who helped there. So I'm not touching the Kern County situation, I'm just saying that there are statutory limitations on what can be done here. And the next step probably lies with the administration and the legislature.
I think that's a fair statement, an accurate representation of what happens on the juvenile justice side. I can tell you that we quickly instituted the changes made by the regulatory, by the regulations that came forth out of the body that you work with, and I think the field has aggressively embraced those and moved towards implementing them. So we continue down the path that we have the authority to do, and like I said, this is not in any way our acceptance of things that go wrong in facilities. There are many, many factors that feed into that. We absolutely exert all the authority we are given to do what we have been asked to do in jails and juvenile halls across the state. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you all for Throwback Thursday, and I appreciate your attendance and your patience with our tardiness, and see you in February.